Welcome to the muscular system, the second half of week 2, and the natural partner to the skeletal module we just finished. Bones are levers and joints are hinges, but nothing moves until a muscle pulls. Today we meet the puller. The next lecture covers strains, muscular dystrophy, the diagnostics, and the medications. The third muscle lecture covers your role, ambulation assistance, and positioning support. Muscle is the tissue that converts chemical energy into movement. It's the only tissue that can shorten on command. And it does far more than move your bones. Muscle stabilizes your posture, generates most of your body heat, pushes food through your gut, and beats in your chest about 100,000 times a day without your permission. By the end of this lecture, you'll be able to name the 3 muscle types, describe the structure of a skeletal muscle down to the sarcomere, explain how a muscle actually contracts, and describe how muscle changes from childhood to old age. Here are our 5 outcomes. First, list what the muscular system does, and like the skeleton, it's more than the obvious. Second, compare the 3 muscle types, skeletal, smooth, and cardiac, by their structure, where they're found, and whether you control them. Third, describe the structure of a skeletal muscle, zooming in from the whole muscle all the way down to the sarcomere, the tiny unit that does the shortening. Fourth, explain the sliding filament mechanism, which is how contraction actually happens, along with the neuromuscular junction where the nerve tells the muscle to fire. And fifth, describe how muscle changes across the lifespan from childhood growth to sarcopenia, the age-related loss of muscle. Here are your medical terms that you need to know to understand this lesson fully. Take a moment to look them over, as we'll use them as they come up in the slides ahead. Don't worry too much about memorizing them now, just get familiar with the terms. Pause the video for as long as you need to take notes. Let's start with what muscle does. There are 5 functions, and only the first one is obvious, and that's movement. Skeletal muscle pulls on bones to move you through the world. And notice the verb, pull. Muscles pull, they never push. They shorten, and that's really their only trick. Then there's posture and stability. Even when you're standing perfectly still, muscles are firing constantly to hold you upright and to steady your joints. Sit still and your postural muscles are working. Heat production. Muscle contraction is inefficient, and the waste product is heat, which is exactly what your body wants. Muscle generates most of your body heat, and when you're cold, shivering is your body deliberately contracting muscle to warm you up. Then organ function. Smooth muscle in the walls of hollow organs moves things along. Food through the gut, urine down the ureters, and blood through vessels as they constrict and dilate. Then circulation. Cardiac muscle pumps blood every second of your life without a single conscious command. The green panel gives you 2 numbers, roughly 600 skeletal muscles making up somewhere between a third and half of your body weight. This is the largest tissue mass in your body. Three types of muscle, and the image on the right shows what each looks like under the microscope. 2 questions sort them all. Is it striped, and do you control it? Skeletal muscle is striated. Those visible stripes come from the orderly stacking of sarcomeres, which we'll talk about shortly. And it's voluntary, which means it's under your conscious control. It attaches to bones and moves the skeleton. A quirk worth knowing: skeletal muscle cells are multinucleated, with many nuclei per cell, because they form by many small cells fusing together. Smooth muscle is not striated, and it's involuntary. It lines the walls of hollow organs and blood vessels, the stomach, intestines, bladder, ureters, and arteries. It works slowly, steadily, and entirely without your awareness, moving contents along. Cardiac muscle is the interesting hybrid of the two, striated like skeletal muscle, but involuntary like smooth muscle. It exists only in the heart, and it has a property neither of the others has. It contracts rhythmically on its own, generating its own beat. We'll return to that when we talk about the cardiovascular system. So, skeletal is striped and voluntary. Smooth is unstriped and involuntary. Cardiac is striped and involuntary. Learn this grid and you'll never confuse them. The rest of today, though, is going to focus on skeletal muscle. Now let's take a skeletal muscle apart, following the figure on the right. The organizing idea is simple. A muscle is a bundle of bundles. Start with the whole muscle. Let's talk about your biceps. Inside it are bundles called fascicles, each wrapped in connective tissue. Inside each fascicle are the muscle fibers. And here's a term to fix. A muscle fiber is a single muscle cell. It's long, cylindrical, and has many nuclei. Inside each fiber are rod-like structures called myofibrils. And inside each myofibril, stacked end to end, are the sarcomeres. Say the chain out loud. Muscle, fascicle, fiber, myofibril, sarcomere. From the whole arm down to something you need an electron microscope to see. The sarcomere is the functional unit, the smallest piece that can actually contract. Everything above it is packaging. And because sarcomeres line up and register across the fiber, their dark and light regions align, producing the stripes we call striations. That's why skeletal muscle is striated. It's not just decoration, it's the shadow of the machinery. Finally, the connective tissue wrappings converge at each end into a tendon that anchors the muscle to bone. One attachment, the origin, stays relatively fixed. The other, the insertion, is the one that moves. When the muscle shortens, the insertion is pulled towards the origin, and that is movement. Don't get tendons confused with ligaments. Tendons attach muscle to bone. Ligaments attach bone to bone. Here's the physiology of a skeletal muscle, how a thought becomes a movement. There are 4 steps, and the whole thing is called the sliding filament mechanism. Step 1, a motor nerve carries the signal and releases a chemical messenger, acetylcholine, at the neuromuscular junction, the tiny gap where nerve meets muscle. That's the handoff point, and it matters clinically. It's where nerve gas, botulinum toxin, and the disease myasthenia gravis all do their damage. Step 2, the arriving signal causes calcium to be released inside the muscle fiber. Calcium is the switch. It uncovers the binding sites along the actin filaments that were previously blocked. Step 3, now the myosin heads, on the thick filaments, grab onto those exposed sites on the thin actin filaments and pull, like hands hauling in a rope, hand over hand. This costs energy, supplied by ATP. As myosin walks along actin, the ends of the sarcomere are dragged towards the other, and the sarcomere shortens. Multiply that by billions of sarcomeres, and the whole muscle contracts. And here is the beautiful part, and the reason for the name. The filaments themselves never change length. They simply slide past one another. Step 4. When the nerve signal stops, calcium is pumped back into storage. The binding sites are covered again, myosin lets go, and the muscle relaxes. Contraction is active and costs ATP, and so does relaxation. Now let's put muscles to work. Everything here follows from one fact. A muscle can only pull. It shortens. It cannot lengthen itself or push. That single limitation explains the architecture of the whole body. Because a muscle can't push a bone back, muscles must be arranged in opposing pairs. The card on the right shows the classic one. The biceps contracts and bends the elbow. To straighten it again, the biceps can't push, so the triceps on the other side contracts and pulls it back. Every joint you have works this way. We name the roles. The prime mover or agonist is the muscle producing the motion. The antagonist is the one that opposes it, and it relaxes and stretches while the agonist works. Synergists assist the prime mover, and stabilizers or fixators hold nearby joints steady so the motion is clean. Muscle tone is the low-level contraction present even at rest. It's why a living muscle is firm rather than floppy, and it's what holds your head up while you read this. And the last bullet is the principle you'll teach and see clinically for the rest of your career. Use it or lose it. Muscle enlarges with use, called hypertrophy, and wastes away with disuse, called atrophy. A limb in a cast for 6 weeks comes out visibly smaller. That's the bridge to our lifespan slides coming next. Now the lifespan, and it parallels bone closely. Most of your muscle fibers are formed before birth. After that, growth happens mainly by existing fibers getting bigger, not by adding new ones. So like your skeleton's fixed count of bones, you start with a largely set inventory. In infancy, movement develops in a predictable direction, head to toe, what we call cephalocaudal. A baby controls the head first, then the trunk enough to sit, then the legs enough to crawl and walk. Notice what's really developing there. It's not primarily the muscles, it's the nervous system learning to command it. The muscle was mostly there. Through childhood, muscle grows steadily as fibers enlarge with use. Then at puberty, testosterone drives a marked increase in muscle mass, which is why the difference in average muscle mass between the sexes widens sharply in adolescence. Peak muscle mass and strength arrive in the 20s to early 30s, the same window as peak bone mass. And that's not a coincidence. The two systems build together, respond to load together, and as we'll see next, decline together. What you build in young adulthood is what you spend later. At the other end of life, muscle declines, and the name for it is sarcopenia, the age-related loss of muscle mass, strength, and function. The numbers matter. Muscle mass begins declining around age 30 at roughly 3 to 5% per decade, and the rate accelerates after 60. That's happening quietly for decades in every patient you'll ever see over 50. Fast twitch fibers, the ones built for power and speed, are lost preferentially. That's why an older adult loses explosive power and quick reactions before they lose endurance, and it's a large part of why they can't catch themselves during a stumble. At the same time, tendons stiffen, reflexes slow, and balance degrades. Put those together and you get the clinical consequence that dominates geriatric care. Weakness leads to falls, and falls lead to the hip fracture we studied in the skeletal module, and that fracture leads to loss of independence. The muscular and skeletal systems fail together, and they fail a patient at the same moment. But end on the hopeful note, because it's true and it's evidence-based. Muscle responds to resistance training at any age. Even patients in their 80s and 90s gain strength with progressive resistance exercise, and adequate dietary protein supports it. Sarcopenia is expected, but frailty is not inevitable. Let's pull it all together. See what I did there? I said pull because we're talking about muscles. Haha. 1. Muscle moves the body, maintains posture, produces most of your body heat, moves the contents of hollow organs, and pumps blood. 2. There are 3 types: skeletal, striated, and voluntary. Smooth, unstriated, and involuntary. Cardiac, which is striated and involuntary. Striped and controlled, that's skeletal muscle. 3. The structural chain: muscle, fascicle, fiber, myofibril, sarcomere, with the sarcomere as the functional unit. And 4. Contraction is a nerve signal at the neuromuscular junction: calcium release, myosin pooling actin using ATP, and the sarcomere shortening. The filaments slide, they don't shrink. And 5. Muscles only pull, so they work in opposing pairs. The agonist produces motion, and the antagonist opposes it, like the biceps and triceps. And 6. Fibers are set before birth. Muscle peaks in the 20s to early 30s, and sarcopenia follows. But resistance training works at any age. In Lecture 8, we put this to work. Strains, muscular dystrophy, range of motion, and strength testing, and the muscle relaxants and pain medications you'll see on charts. Here are the references used to put this lecture together.